Okay, I'm just gonna do it like this. Give you guys a second to log on. Hello, hello. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so you have probably come here because you're wondering how to get started with yoga. This is the place to find out about that. Yay, Alex is here. Hey, you're not a newbie. Oh, well, it's nice to have you guys here. Yeah, feel free to say hi in the chat. Hopefully my video is straight now. Does it look straight? I think there's a little delay in the chat too. Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to start to talk about some things to keep in mind if you are looking to get started with yoga, or you're just getting back into your practice, or maybe you've tried yoga before and you didn't like it. So maybe this will give you a different idea of what yoga is. So a lot of people come to yoga thinking, okay, I'm going to get fit. This is some stretching, there's probably some strengthening, there's some movement. So a lot of people see yoga as a sort of another fitness or exercise program, which it definitely is. Definitely has a component of fitness. But the important thing to know about yoga is that there's a different purpose, or traditionally there was a different purpose that was a lot deeper than just the physical. And this physical part of yoga is actually just one of 8 different spiritual practices in order to prepare you to reach yoga. And the word yoga means union. And you can think of that in terms of sort of like a oneness with the universe, for lack of a better way to put it. And so you've probably heard that before, being one with the universe. What exactly does that even really mean? But it's sort of this path to coming back to your true divine self, that you are part of this greater divine energy. You're part of the universe. And hence we have the whole idea of enlightenment. And so there's this part of yoga that's really about more than just stretching. The stretches, which actually the physical part of yoga is called the asana. Asana is the word for poses or posture. And that is one of those 8 limbs of the 8-limb path to yoga. And so that is said to sort of prepare the body to achieve this enlightenment, or to achieve this union, right? This sort of feeling of divine connection to the universe. It's supposed to clear the body. It's supposed to allow the pranayama, which is the breath, to flow freely. It's supposed to open up the energy centers, which you may have heard of as chakras. So I'm not going to get too deep into some of the philosophy behind it, but basically I just want to give you an idea that yoga is this much greater philosophy and a much larger concept than just fitness. However, a lot of people want to come to yoga for that fit part, right? So you want to get more flexible, you want to get stronger, maybe you want to lose weight, although I'm not exactly sure that yoga is the best way to lose weight, but it can help. So there's quite a lot of reasons for coming to yoga, but chances are that you've probably come here because you're looking for the asana practice. Now, I don't want to make any assumptions, because you may have other reasons for practicing yoga, which is perfectly fine. But I am going to focus this video a little bit more on the asana practice, since that's what most of us are talking about when we talk about yoga. So the first thing I want to recommend to you is to sort of get an idea of why you want to practice yoga. What are some of your reasons for practicing? And you might you might have a number of reasons, right? So personally, when I started practicing yoga, I knew that I wanted to keep my body in shape. I really was coming to yoga for the physical benefits. But there are, and you may have heard this before, there are a lot of other benefits, including it can benefit your mental health. So a lot of people actually might come to yoga if they have a lot of anxiety, if they're depressed. It's a great way to work with the emotions in the body and the mind, to calm the mind. So there's that aspect of it. It's also really great for our internal bodily functioning, right? So all of our organs, the blood flow, everything that's working inside, like the nervous system. Obviously, the mind-body connection, it's all connected, right? So it's this sort of bigger concept where we have a lot of different benefits, not just getting stronger and more flexible. Which brings me to an important thing that I should mention, which is that a lot of people tend to think that you have to be flexible in order to practice yoga. And this is one of the biggest myths out there, because practicing yoga is what's going to help you get flexible. So you don't need to be flexible to start off with a yoga practice. And there are so many different kinds of yoga and so many options within each pose in the yoga practice that you should be able to find a variation that works in your body before going to the next pose or going to the next variation of that pose that might be a little bit more advanced. And I'm going to get a little bit into what the idea of beginner and advanced yogi really is, because contrary to what many people believe, being an advanced yogi is not being able to do some kind of crazy inversion. Of course, that is considered an advanced yoga pose, but that doesn't make you an advanced yogi. So I'm going to get into that a little bit at the end of this video. But let's get back to the idea of choosing your reasons. So do you have intentions to get more flexible, strong? Are your reasons more about stress reduction? Is it about spirituality or connecting with yourself? A big part of yoga is getting to know yourself through the body and through observation of your thoughts. So if this is your goal, this is going to affect which kind of yoga you might want to choose to start off with. So that's going to get me into some of the different styles of yoga that are out there. And there's so many styles of yoga. When I first started practicing yoga, I tried out a ton of different styles. I went to so many different classes, and there were so many classes that I went to where I said, I don't like yoga. Like, this is not for me. And maybe that's happened to you. Maybe you've gone to some classes and you didn't really like it. And it's kind of difficult, I think, to realize that there's a huge variation. So you might find that if you go to a different class, you're going to get a completely different experience of what yoga is. So for me personally, I didn't start enjoying yoga until I found the vinyasa style. So I started off with all different styles, and when I found the vinyasa style, this is where I started to really connect with the aspect of yoga. And vinyasa is a style that is very popular in the West. It's probably one of the most popular, I would say, styles in the West. And those of you who have seen some of my videos, you have seen the vinyasa style. It's basically a very dynamic kind of yoga. It tends to be quite physically demanding, although this depends a lot on each teacher. So if you are looking for a very physically demanding practice, something like a vinyasa or ashtanga, which is the more traditional variation of vinyasa, those kinds of yoga are going to be more physically demanding, strenuous, vigorous. Of course, you can always modify and make it your own, but that's going to be a lot more strenuous than, say, a hatha yoga practice. So hatha is it's a type of yoga, but it's also the word that we use for the yoga overall in terms of the asana practice, right? The physical posture practice. So when someone refers to hatha yoga, they could be referring to the physical asana practice, or they could be referring to the style of yoga, which is hatha. And hatha tends to be a little more slower paced, which makes it a really great class for beginners, especially beginners who are a little bit more stiff, a little more inflexible, maybe really out of shape. This style of yoga tends to be a lot more accessible. You'll hold the poses a little bit longer, and there will be fewer poses than in a vinyasa class, which will tend to be a little bit more flowing, and there's a little bit more emphasis on the movement and the transition from pose to pose. So obviously, once you develop a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more strength, transitioning from pose to pose will be a lot easier for you. But those are not the only styles out there. So those are just kind of the more popular styles. You also have some more restorative types of yoga, so specifically restorative yoga, and that's generally a great choice if you're working with an injury, or if it's basically assuming that you're not at an optimal level of health. So those poses are held a lot longer. There's usually a lot less poses in each class, and you have a lot of props, and it's not meant to take you to your edge. Whereas the vinyasa, the ashtanga, hot yoga, which I forgot to mention, those tend to be a little bit more about building resiliency in the body and the mind. And so it's a little bit more like a fitness class where the intention is to push towards that limit. I would say that yoga is different than a fitness class in that you never want to keep pushing beyond to a point where maybe you're getting into a space of injuring yourself, right? So I think that tends to be not that you would injure yourself in fitness classes, right? But the idea of pushing and pushing and pushing yourself beyond is a little bit more common in a fitness class than you would find in a yoga class. So those are a few styles of yoga. Then there is the yin style of yoga, which some people confuse with restorative. It's not intended to be restorative, and it's not assuming that you're not already at an optimal level of health. However, it's similar in that you have a lot of passive poses that are held for a longer period of time, and the idea is to put a lot less effort on the muscles so that you can actually target the fascia and the connective tissues, and it's a lot more meditative. The idea behind it is to, it's a little bit more introspective. There's not as much movement, so there's time to be still with your thoughts, to observe what comes up, to sit with the discomfort that you might feel. And so in that way, it also tends to help with resiliency, but the major idea of yin yoga is to sort of surrender and to let go, to learn to let go. And that's very different than the kind of resiliency building that you might find in a vinyasa style class. So those are just a few different styles. You also have styles that are a little bit more focused on connecting the spirituality. So you'll have like Kundalini yoga, where there's a lot of intense movement and a lot of intense breath work. And this is really works on sort of clearing the chakras and lengthening the spine. And I'm not going to get too far into it, but there's some chanting usually. Same thing with Bhakti style yoga, so that's a little bit more heart focused. And also really connecting the spirituality, a lot of chanting. So there's really this broad, a huge amount of different kinds of yoga styles. And if you just go on Google and you search different yoga styles, you'll be able to find a lot of descriptions. So I'm not going to go through all of them now, but you may want to do a little bit of research and see which one kind of speaks to you. And then I definitely recommend going and trying out a bunch of these different classes. Oh yes, and one that I forgot to mention, Iyengar yoga is also really interesting. Iyengar is a style that tends to also be really great for beginners because there's a lot of focus on precision in alignment. So it's a really great way to sort of take the time to get into each pose and get to know the proper alignment, which in vinyasa tends to often be very overlooked. So because vinyasa is more fast-paced, you tend to have a lot less cues. and the idea is more in the movement rather than in precision. So if precision is your thing, maybe Iyengar is the style that you might want to check out. But like I said, you should do a little bit of Googling to find out which kind of yoga would speak to you the most, or go out and try different kinds of yoga. And the other thing with trying out different kinds of yoga is to try out different teachers. So really try to find out which kind of teacher speaks to you the most. And I think this is a really important part of choosing what kind of yoga you're going to do. Finding a teacher that you really connect with, somebody who inspires you to find that self-growth journey within the yoga practice, right? So I remember, for example, when I went to a Bikram style yoga, which is something that I haven't, sorry, I'm just reading the comments a little bit. It's hard to not get distracted. Yeah, happy to break that down, Robert. Yeah, and feel free to, drop some questions if you want me to go a little bit deeper into some of the different styles. I can also answer questions afterwards. But so what I was mentioning about going into a Bikram yoga class. So Bikram is a style that is done in, I think, 90 or 100 degrees. It's a heated practice, which is really great for opening up the muscles. Feels amazing. Well, some people think it feels amazing. Others just want to pass out. I personally really love that aspect of it. But I really didn't care for the teaching style behind it because it felt to me very, almost like I was in a boot camp, like being yelled at, which felt really un-yogic to me. But some people might need that, and they might need that more rigid sort of structured teaching, that kind of voice. Definitely, for me personally, and I don't know, you might find this too, for me personally, the way I hear the voice from teachers is a big factor in whether or not I enjoy the class or not. So I like to really feel that this voice is calming me, is putting me into a state where I feel like I can focus on my body and my breath, and it's not taking me out of that presence with myself. So I don't know, you have to try out different teachers and see what might work for you the best. And it doesn't mean that you have to choose just one teacher for the rest of your life. I love to continue to try out new teachers all the time. I have certain teachers that I go back to. I have certain teachers that I'll take a class every now and then, but there's somebody that I wouldn't necessarily take a class from regularly. And then also, my mother is a yoga teacher, and that's a really special connection for me to learn from my mother, who's very knowledgeable. She's also really trained. She has like every possible kind of yoga training out there, and she teaches a very different style than I do. But I love to learn from her too. So anyways, that's enough about me, but you get an idea of some of the different types of teachers. Go out and explore and try out different teachers. And then the next thing this brings me to is to think about what would be the best scenario for you to practice. So obviously now yoga studios are mostly closed. I don't know where you guys are in the world, but I'm pretty sure that in most parts of the world, yoga studios are still not open. But let's assume that they are, and then at some point when you practice yoga, you may want to consider practicing in a studio. But other than that, you have a lot of different kinds of online options. And you have the option online of live classes by Zoom usually, but like where the teacher's actually present, you're probably practicing along other people. And then you have pre-recorded classes. And so some people tend to find that live aspect helps them to feel like they're in a classroom with people. I know a lot of people say that doing yoga on your own can be really, really challenging, which is totally, I get that. I've personally always been fine doing yoga on my own in my home when I can put the video on at any time of day. So that's one of the benefits, I think, of being able to take a pre-recorded class, is to choose what time of day, to choose what kind of class it is, depending on what you're feeling in your body that day. There's obviously a lot more variety out there. than if you were to go to a studio where you'd have you'd be a little bit more limited in terms of what kinds of classes are going to be offered in any given studio. But one of the benefits of practicing in a studio is that usually they have all the props you need. Obviously, you can have a teacher there who can watch you, which is really helpful. So if you're just starting to practice yoga and you've never done yoga in front of a real teacher, it can be challenging, I think, to know if you're kind of doing the poses right, or if you're doing them in a way that you're going to stay safe and get the most benefit out of the pose. Whereas when you're in a studio and you have a teacher present, they can sort of look at your body, make adjustments, make a comment here and there specifically to you, as well as change their cueing given what they see in the classroom, right? So for me personally, when I'm teaching classes online, either by Zoom where they're live, or if hola Daniel. So anyways, I get so distracted with the comments because I'm like, oh, who's joined? So what was I saying? Okay, so when I'm teaching online in a live Zoom class, the students are small dots on the computer screen because I'm trying to have you all on gallery view. So I may not be able to pick up on so many things as I would in an in-person class, but I use a lot of the information from when I did teach classes in person. I use my own practice, of course, to inform me to decide on what cueing is better. I go back to questions that students have asked me in the past, so kind of knowing more or less what might be tricky in each pose for a variety of people. And so that's where my cueing will come from, but it's no comparison, of course, to being able to see people really literally in front of you. So when you are practicing at home, you want to keep that in mind, that you may want to do just a little bit of extra research on some proper alignment. You may want to reach out to the teacher. So I always try to make myself available to my students. So if you sent me an email, hey, I'm not really sure if I'm doing this pose right, try to assist you that way. This obviously isn't going to be the case though if you're going to do yoga online through like a bigger brand or something, like Alo Moves is one of those bigger studios. I think they're not as accessible in terms of being able to, I think, reach out to the teachers. So you're kind of on your own there. And so that's maybe one of the cons of doing yoga online. However, if you've done a little bit of yoga in a studio, then maybe you have a little bit of a base from which to work. And one of the pros, like I mentioned, of doing the pre-recorded classes is being able to do it on your own time and choosing the length of the class, choosing the style of the class. And there's so much variety out there. You have everything from free YouTube videos to paid memberships to just live classes or live donation classes from various teachers. So I think that can also overwhelm people where to begin. So suddenly feeling like you have so many options that you're not really sure what fits for you. And so just to keep that in mind, that in the beginning, while you're searching for what kind of yoga feels right for you, there's going to be this period, this sort of trial period of paying attention to your body, paying attention to the voice of the teacher, and seeing what you feel works for you, what makes you feel good. I think a good indication of whether or not the class is right for you and the teacher is right for you is how you feel after the class. So like a funny story, when I started practicing yoga, I used to hate when teachers would talk for hours about, like, not for hours obviously, but like, I don't know, we would get into Shavasana and there would be like this talk of like we're floating on a lotus and in the water, and like kind of for me was really woo-woo wah-wah spiritual stuff, which at that time I was totally not into. And I would lie there in Shavasana and I would start to get so angry. I would literally get so pissed off. And I would walk out of that class just feeling nowhere near relaxed, completely so mad. Just in a worse state of being than when I entered that class. And it wasn't the teacher's fault at all, but it was definitely where I was at in that moment and what I was able to receive from the yoga practice. So that's just something you might want to keep in mind, like paying attention to how the class makes you feel, how the teacher makes you feel. And it's not necessarily, yoga is not necessarily always going to make you feel good, right? So it's not necessarily about feeling good. It's also about growth. And growth sometimes means being in discomfort, right? So I'm going to get into that in a little bit, because first I want to go through my list a little bit here and touch on some other topics before I start rambling away. So this is one of the things that I knew was going to happen when I do this live, because I don't do too many lives like this, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to start rambling about whatever. So anyways, but one of my New Year's resolutions is to do more of these lives so I get better at just getting straight to the point. But okay, let's just go through the list and then we'll get back to that topic. Okay, so since we're talking about having a home practice, and this is probably what you're going to be starting off with before getting back into a studio, you're going to want to have some props, and usually the teacher, whether it's a recorded class or a live class, should let you know what props you're going to want to use for that class. And most commonly, you'll probably want to get at least a pair of blocks, yoga blocks. Again, if you Google this, yoga blocks, you should be able to find a bunch. They don't need to be anything special. They're not too expensive. But these are used to prop up your body, to close gaps where you might need to make certain poses more accessible to you and to help you to get a bigger benefit from each pose, especially if you are limited in your flexibility to start off with. Using blocks in your practice can help you to get the intended stretch rather than to compromise a different part of your body. And this is like very common, for example, for like stretching the hamstrings, which a lot of people who start off yoga have very tight hamstrings, which is the part behind your back of your thighs, right? The back of the leg. And I have a whole blog article on this, actually, if you are interested in reading it on my website, about how to modify your practice for tight hamstrings. So for example, here, if you don't use the prop, you might end up putting that into your lower back instead of into the hamstring stretch. And so that is something to be aware of, that there's certain ways to modify the practice so that you actually get the intended benefit. And the thing is that not all teachers are going to get into that. So I try to offer quite a lot of modifications. I try to explain a little bit what the modification is for throughout the class, but obviously I'm not going to be able to share every single modification out there. So you may want to do a little extra research or ask the teacher if there's anything that you can do. Even I'm going to recommend that if you're brand new to yoga, you may even want to consider doing a private session so that a teacher can work with you one-on-one and to find out where are the places that you might want to make adjustments to your practice. But anyways, let me read Robert's question. Okay. In the Shavasana, okay, here, so Robert asks, in the Shavasana, you indicated that it wasn't what you were able to receive from the teacher at the time. What do you think the teacher was trying to convey, and were you able to evolve to be able to receive it? Ooh, that's a good question. Okay, so I think that now in retrospect, of course, when a teacher is guiding you into Shavasana and they're, in this case, it was kind of, I think I would call it more of a visualization. I think they were using the visualization to relax, to help you to relax into your body. And for me, it just didn't work at the time. And I think that at that time, not only did I really need, excuse me, more movement in order to feel relaxed, like I couldn't get myself into a meditative state unless I really moved my body a lot. Like I was a lot more restless then. But also, I think for me it's important the way the teacher shares the spirituality of the practice of yoga. The timing, but also the way in which it's shared, so that it's digestible to someone who's maybe not so used to hearing that. And I can't say, but there are, of course, a lot of sort of spiritual regurgitations, I'll call them, where it's, it can often sound like, oh, I'm teaching a yoga class, so I have to share some kind of stuff, but doesn't necessarily always sound like it's coming from the heart and from the experience of the practice. And I think that's what was kind of happening for me. It was just kind of, this doesn't really resonate with me at the moment. But now I think because my yoga practice has evolved to something a little bit more spiritual, and I actually do meditate aside from doing the physical asana practice, definitely much more open to receiving it. And I think it's just a natural evolution of becoming more aware of myself and of making that connection from the body to the emotions to the spiritual aspects of yoga. And I think that's a huge thing for Westerners who are starting to practice yoga, because I think we don't tend to have that kind of spirituality. We don't tend to grow up with that kind of spirituality, so it can feel really foreign and weird. I mean, if you've grown up with spirituality, maybe you're already a lot more open to receiving it. But I think also for a lot of people that even if you were interested in that at one point, there have been other people in your life that have shut that down. I know, for example, like I had an ex-boyfriend who was like, oh no, science only, like no astrology, don't talk to me about any of that kind of stuff. And it kind of shut down a little bit of that sort of spirituality or thinking about things in a more energetic kind of way, in a non-tangible way. So that's something that I think once you start to practice yoga more often can start to open up again. You can start to become a little bit more open to receiving that. So I don't know if that answered your question, Robert, but again, here I am rambling. So this is why I write blog articles instead of go live, because I can edit myself when I'm writing. When I go live, I'm just like, blah, 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 blah. So anyway, so thank you for putting up with me. But let me continue down my list, and let's see, what were we? Great, I'm glad, Robert. Yeah, glad that helps. Okay, so props. We were talking about props, and I'm such a big proponent of props. I think that especially if you're inflexible to begin with, you should really make use of props. Aside from blocks, you'll probably want to have a strap, and these are pretty affordable items, and if you don't have these, then you can always replace them with household items. So like blocks can be replaced with a pair of heavy books, because they're usually meant to be on the ground to raise the ground to you. So if you're like in a forward fold and your hands don't reach the ground, you can place them on your books or your blocks. And the strap can help in a lot of poses where you might be trying to connect two parts of your body. So often, for example, you might connect the hands at some point and behind you, and maybe you're not so flexible in the shoulders. You can't reach the hands together, so the strap will be helpful. And if you don't have a strap, then you can just use a belt or a scarf. Anything like that will do. But again, the yoga strap, if you Google it, maybe I'll leave in the comments below, I'll leave some places where you can buy that. But yeah, those are just like your general props. And then really probably just pillows and blankets at some point. So it's not a lot of props, but they can be very useful. And hopefully your teacher will suggest when to use the props. And if not, then like I said, if a pose feels really difficult for you, then you should always try to reach out to that teacher if you have that option. Or you can write to me, even if I'm not your teacher. You can write to me, and hopefully I can help you out with that. Okay, so let's start to get into, once you've sort of identified your reasons for wanting to practice yoga, which is going to help you identify which style of yoga resonates with you more and lead you to try out some different styles maybe and some different teachers. You've gotten your props. I didn't mention clothing, but you definitely don't need to buy like $100 pants of $100 Lululemon pants. Like, you don't need to look the part. Really just need comfortable clothing that you can move in and stretch in. So jeans, maybe not so ideal, but anything that's comfortable that you have in your closet, you don't need to go out and spend a lot of money. But if you do want to get some nice yoga clothing, I'll leave some comments or leave some brands down below in the comments. And just share a few places that I like to buy yoga clothing from. And yeah, so that covers what you need. And now we sort of get to the part where we're in the first class. And so here's the part that I think is going to become really important. So I always like to tell students, when you come to a yoga class, don't feel like you need to do absolutely everything that's being offered. So a lot of classes tend to be all levels classes, and what that means is that you have people who've been practicing yoga for years, and then you have people who've just started practicing yoga. You have people who've been practicing for years, but maybe practice like once a month, and so they might be a lot less flexible than somebody who practices every day, even if they practice for less time. So you have a lot of variety, you have a lot of different bodies. So most teachers are going to offer several options so that you can find something that works for your body and that can also push you to grow. So for example, in many of the poses that I offer, I will give let's say up to 3 different variations, starting with the more accessible one, going to the next layer, and then the last layer will tend to be for somebody whose body is already a little bit more open. But it can be difficult to kind of know which option is for you. And so this tends to be the way that most teachers offer variety. So starting with the easiest option, going all the way to the most challenging option. So you can sort of try out that first one, maybe try out that second one, see how it feels in your body. Really pay close attention to what your body is telling you about whether or not the next variation is going to be accessible to you. And so a big part of this is just being really listening to your own body, allowing your body to be your guide more so even than the teacher, right? So just using the teacher's cues as guidelines, but then to be in your body the whole time, listening, feeling. And if you're coming into yoga having not done anything with your body for a long time, you might not even really realize what's going on in your body. It may take some time to discover what these feelings are in your body, these sensations. In some cases, you might not even feel a sensation at all. And in some cases, a very common thing is to not quite be able to discern tension from pain. And so this is a huge thing that I feel really needs to be emphasized, because tension is going to be there. When your muscles are tight, tension will always be there. But knowing what tension feels like can be really tricky. So one of the indications of having gone too far is when you feel sharp or shooting pain, and you should never be feeling that in a yoga practice. Tension will feel like there's something kind of tugging on the muscles. It's kind of constantly there as you stretch a little bit deeper, but you should never be feeling pinching, tingling. Tingling means you've probably done something with a nerve, right? So tingling, pinching, compression, shooting pain, right? So you kind of want to avoid that. And in some cases, you might get to that point before you can recognize that in your body. And that, I think that's just really that's part of the process. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you, of course. But I've definitely injured myself. And even I've injured myself from yoga even after I've been doing it for many years, just in a moment of not staying present with my body and not paying attention to my own limit and letting my ego kind of get in the way, right? And say, oh, I can do this. Like, I've been doing this, I've been practicing for years. I'm flexible. I can do this. And then sort of not realizing that, no, I don't actually have the strength to go into that yet, and so it's definitely a big learning process, and it can take a long time to get to know your body. But that's one of the beautiful things about the practice, to to discover more about your body, to bring to mind certain things that maybe have been dormant for a long time that you haven't felt in your body. And so, like I said, just to sum that up, always try to pay attention to your body throughout the class and use that as your guide. Trust it. Learn to trust the body. And this can be a huge thing as well for a lot of people. Maybe if you've even had some kind of trauma in your life, trusting your body can bring up some difficult emotions. And so that's sort of actually the next thing I wanted to talk about was the emotional aspect. But before I do that, so let's go back to this idea of so just kind of paying attention to what your body's asking of you. Also, like knowing if you should be pushing harder or if you should be backing off a little bit. And part of what we're always searching for in yoga is that place where we meet our edge. And that term, the edge, you'll hear that a lot in yoga. The edge means finding the place where you're going just past your comfort zone so that you can invite growth into your body and into your mind, but not pushing so far that you're going to get injured. And that is going to change day to day because there are so many factors that can change every day. So there will be days when I get on my mat and I can't keep my balance for shit, right? And I think I've done this pose a million times, but for some reason I can't balance today. And those are things you want to pay attention to because there's certain factors. Oh, maybe I didn't eat something for a long time, and so all my body's energy is going towards trying to keep me awake just because what I really need is fuel, right? And so you can get to know these things throughout your practice as they show up. And one of the things that might show up with this is this conversation you start to have in your head about your body. Right? So why can't my body do this? Or, oh, I used to be able to do this, 10 years ago. Why can't I do it now? Or the opposite, like, oh, I got this. And kind of maybe not even allowing yourself to get out of your comfort zone, right? Like maybe always being really gentle with yourself and saying, oh, I just need to stay in a child's pose the whole class. And maybe you're taking yourself out that way, maybe you're not giving yourself the opportunity to grow. So I think that going back to finding your edge with each yoga practice that you come into is one of the most beautiful ways to get to know your true self, because you'll see all these emotions come up. And a big part of what we try to do in yoga is to observe those emotions without sort of reacting to them. So in that way we bring more awareness to our habits, our thoughts, our processes, right? And from there, we can begin to sort of choose different options for ourselves, right? So choose different reactions. But anyways, this is getting like really deep into yoga, which I was maybe not even intending to go this far into it, because in the beginning, you might just kind of be trying to get a grasp on where to put your foot and which arm goes up and the alignment, right? So you might even feel like, I can't listen to all of the cues that are being given to me. And that's another thing you might want to pay attention to when you're choosing a teacher is, like, do you need someone who is going to give you very minimal cues, or do you need someone who's going to really get specific and tell you exactly where this foot should go and what to do with your toe and all of that? So, or maybe you go into one of those classes and you kind of ignore some of the cues and you just try to get into the shape and just find the shape and just get comfortable with that shape. And then in the next class and the next class and the next class, you start to hear more of the different cues, right? And so over time, your body slowly starts to understand what to do. I think a common misconception is like you get into the yoga class and it should all make sense the first day. And it's like anything new that you try, there's always going to be this period of time before you kind of get the hang of it. Although I don't really like to use that phrase, because with yoga, I don't think it's so much about getting the hang of it, because underneath it all, it's about being present. It's about knowing being present enough with yourself that you're seeing what comes up day in and day out, and it's never going to be the same, right? As soon as you start to think, well, it's always going to be the same, that's when you're stuck in the same place, and you're not being present, right? So, yeah, so there's that aspect. Now to kind of like touch on the emotional aspect. So it is common that opening up the space in your body and create and stretching certain parts of your body that maybe you haven't felt in a while can also create some emotional release throughout the practice. So I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen to you, but it can, and it's perfectly normal. Especially they say like hip openers tend to be really related to the emotions. We might have a lot of stuck emotions in the hips. Maybe you've heard that before. And so some people might even start to cry. I mean, I've had a good cry in a yoga class before. So that's totally normal. And it's just like anything else that comes up in the class, we try to observe it without reacting so that you understand it, so that you can see it. And that's really where you start to build that self-awareness, is by being able to see yourself every time you come to your mat. See your true self. And I think this is one of the biggest parts for me, is like, your time on your mat is for you to be authentically you. And that's one of the most beautiful things about practicing yoga. It's like your time to not give a shit what that person thinks or what that person thinks, and just be with yourself. Find out what's true for you. And through that observation, and then you can decide what to do with that later. You can make conscious choices after that, instead of running on autopilot. Okay, so that's a few things to expect from maybe not your first class, maybe several classes. Let's see, what else? Okay, so I do get asked often how often you should practice. So obviously, the more you practice, the more benefit you will get out of it. And I think it's a completely personal decision how often to practice. So it depends a lot on your lifestyle, how much time you have, how much of a priority your wellness is, how good it makes you feel. And it's also important to give your body a chance to rest, right? So you can easily overdo it as well. So you can be on either side of the spectrum. But I would say it also has to do with your goals. So if you really want to get more flexible, you're going to want to do it more frequently. So especially if you're somebody who has a really sedentary lifestyle, doing more movement is going to keep the muscles a little bit more mobile and flexible. And even if you don't have a lot of time, I would opt for a shorter practice more frequently than a longer practice once a week. You're not really going to see that much progress if you're only coming once a week, and in between that, you are sitting around the whole time. Robert asks, so practicing 3 times a day would be a smidge too much? Not necessarily. I mean, I don't know how long you're practicing for, but I think it's a great idea, for example, to get going in the morning with a little short practice, do something around midday, and then close your evening off. That's also fantastic. I sometimes practice twice a day, but I won't do like a vigorous practice twice a day. I'll do a shorter practice, a more vigorous practice maybe in the morning, and then do like a more yin style practice in the evening to kind of calm down. Or the opposite. Sometimes I like to start my day off nice and slow. Of course, in between that, I'm usually filming videos, moving quite a bit throughout the day, but yeah, it's also really up to you how often you feel like your body needs it and what your goals are. And also depends on what you're trying to do in terms of, okay, let's say you want to go into a deep back bend. I would not recommend going into a deep back bend unless you're doing at least a 60-minute practice. So that's something you might want to consider if you really want to go into these deep, deep stretches. The body takes time to open up. So You know, if you're somebody who only has time to do short practices, you're probably not going to go really deep into the stretches, and it's going to be more like kind of physical maintenance, just, you know, maintaining the body. Yeah, but like I said, it's really up to you what your lifestyle is like, and you can experiment with it, and it might change. Like, so for me, when I first started practicing, I started going once a week to a 90-minute class, and then I quickly realized that I felt like I was starting over, like I had to start from the very beginning. So I started going twice a week to that 90-minute class, and then eventually that came up to 3 times a week. Eventually that went to 5 times a week. And now it just really varies. And like I said, I do a little bit more balance between a vigorous practice and a more meditative practice. And for me, yoga is also, right now, has evolved into a bit more of that sort of self-awareness, self-development, and spirituality. So while I will do a lot of filming of classes where I'm doing really vigorous movement, my own practice tends to actually be a little bit more now on the meditation and maybe some more yin and a little bit of the vinyasa, but not as much as I used to do. So just trying to balance it out a little bit. So anyways, let's see. What else do we want to talk about still? Your yoga practice will evolve, and that's, I think, a really important thing to pay attention to, that that's just a natural result of practicing yoga. Is your body, your mind will evolve. If you had told me when I first started practicing yoga that about yin yoga or about meditating, I was just like, no, I don't want to do that at all. But now I can really kind of embrace it, and also I'm very interested in those other, as I mentioned at the beginning of this live, the other aspects of achieving yoga, right? The union or the divine connection to the universe, which is really just the connection to yourself, I think, to put it more in a more digestible terms. So where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought. So, you know, and I did mention that I was going to say a little bit about what exactly does it mean to be a beginner yogi, and what does it mean to be an advanced yogi? I think the biggest difference is the self-awareness. So like, if you're an advanced yogi, you've been practicing really long, and you're aware enough to know that today is a day that you need to spend in child's pose the entire class, that would be an advanced yogi. It's not getting into a headstand or a handstand. That doesn't make you an advanced yogi. It just makes you physically capable of doing that, and maybe you've removed enough mental blocks to be able to do that, which is awesome, which is fantastic. I have nothing against doing advanced postures, but really what you're searching for is this presence to give you the peace of mind, to connect with yourself. But at the same time, like I said, there's absolutely nothing wrong with coming into yoga with mostly physical aspirations. I started out doing yoga that way. Many people did. And I think it's a process. It's a journey. It's you're not going to end up in the same place as someone else. And I think everyone can make yoga their own. It's your own practice, right? It's the yoga, like I mentioned before, yoga is for you, and it's not about pleasing someone else and putting on a mask for someone else and being something to someone else. It's really about your time to observe yourself, get to know yourself, your true self, be in that authentic self as much as possible, and hopefully bring that off of the mat into your life as much as possible. And that may not happen right in the beginning, right? So in the beginning, you might just be like, okay, I'm feeling great in my body, I'm getting a little bit of a workout. And that's perfectly fine. That's totally, where you should be at in the process. So wherever you're at right now, wherever you're at is exactly where you need to be. That's exactly where your layer of understanding of the practice is. And Alana asks, could you please elaborate on the withdrawal of the senses aspect of yoga? Okay, you're talking about, right, so I mentioned at the beginning that there's an 8-limb path to yoga. So Alana is talking about that, where it's So you have the asana practice, which is the postures, which is what we've mostly been talking about in this video. You have meditation. You have pranayama, which is the breath work, and sometimes yoga classes include pranayama. Then you have this thing called which is the withdrawal of the senses. And personally, I have not gone too far into that myself. So I feel like I can't give you a really great answer, and I would definitely recommend that you Google it to get to know a little bit more of what exactly does that mean. But a lot of all of these spiritual practices, I think, and that included, a lot of it is about detachment and sort of detaching ourselves from what makes us suffer, right? So we attach ourselves to people, we attach ourselves to thoughts, experiences, expectations, a lot of different things that we attach ourselves to, and this is the human suffering, right? And so part of achieving yoga is achieving union, right? Achieving this enlightenment, achieving this divine connection, is to move beyond that by detachment. But again, Google it so that I'm not just spewing thoughts about whatever. But those are so I think I mentioned only 5 of those. But if you Google also 8-limb path to yoga, you'll see what are the other practices. So I think the other 2 that I didn't mention are the yamas and the niyamas. And those are sort of like observances and code. It's like a code of ethics, basically, ways to act. So kind of like the 10 Commandments, but in a yogic sense. Okay, I hope that answers you, Alena. Well, I think basically I have said most of what I want to say. I'm sure something is going to come to mind later when I get off of the live. Thank you guys for putting up with my rambling. Like I mentioned earlier, one of my goals for this year is to get more comfortable with talking live instead of just hiding behind my edited blog posts. So hopefully I will learn with time to get straight to the point. But so just want to mention, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to learn a little bit more and you haven't already read my blog article about this, although I think I pretty much touched on everything that's in that blog article, you can go to my website, so verocrutayoga.com, and you'll find that on there. If you want to give Vinyasa Yoga a try, I have an upcoming 7-day beginner yoga challenge, and that is starting on January 4th. You can sign up for that on my website, also verocrutayoga.com. It's totally free. It's for everybody. And it's basically, I'll be sending you a new 15 to 20 minute class each day for those 7 days. And I'll also pepper in some tips. And you can also reach out to me if anything comes up during that week if you want to learn more. Let's see, what else do I have coming up? I think that's the best way to get started if you're looking for a way to ease into your practice. I also usually give live classes for all levels on Fridays. Of course, not this Friday because it's Christmas, and next Friday because it's New Year's. But other than that, on Fridays I have a live class at noon Eastern time. You just go on my website. You can find out more information about that. But like I mentioned before, go explore. Go on YouTube, find some different styles of yoga, do some Googling, try different teachers, see what works for you. And even if you decide that my classes are not for you, but you have questions about yoga, please feel free to reach out to me. And I always love to get your questions because it really lets me know a little bit more of what you guys are thinking about. And what maybe I haven't considered. So send me your questions, send me your comments, and thank you so much for joining me here on this live. As I mentioned, I'll put some of the links underneath